All right, we are live. Give it a few minutes. But yeah, it is the day after Christmas. I feel like Christmas happened a while ago and it was just yesterday. So, I spent Christmas down in Sunapee at my parents', and we woke up yesterday to a lot of ice. It was pretty good layer, so it made walking around kind of sketchy. And then came home, and up here in Jackson, I think it snowed maybe like 2 inches. So there was a little bit of fresh snow, which was awesome, and I don't think there was any ice. And the Nordic skiing up here actually has been really good. I've been skating the last few days in Jackson, and we're already way ahead of last year. Will never forget Christmas last year. We woke up and wandered around the golf course, and there was like feet of water in some areas, and it was so sad. It was this like foggy, wet golf course, and you could hear the Jackson Falls from our house, and we were pretty sad. So we were way ahead of that this year, so that's a good sign. And I think most of the ski areas are open here, although not a ton of snow, but there's some. So when I reached out on Instagram a little while ago asking people what they were interested in terms of specific information, and quite a few of you asked about knees and skiing because it's such a common issue. And so I figured I would just go over sort of how I think about how the knee interacts with skiing, and then obviously common injuries. So I think there's a few different factors of just the mechanics of skiing, like literally what's going on when we're skiing, and the forces and torque put on the knee directly from like the boot and the ski, and then how we move when we're skiing and how that relates to changing load on the knee. And then, of course, a bunch of people asked just about like conditioning and strengthening for the knee. So I guess to start, I think just taking a review of, like kind of the knee, and then like how it's directly related to skiing. So I think of the knee as this like kind of poor joint that gets abused, and it's between two long bones, right? So we have our femur and our tibia are the two bones that are, the load-bearing bones, and then we have our kneecap. So those are the main players, and then you have your calf muscle, your gastrocnemius, your quad, of course, that comes over the kneecap, and so we'll talk quite a bit about that. That has a huge impact on knee function. And then your hamstrings come down. There's 3 of them, 2 on the inside, 1 on the outside, and they come down across the knee joint and are more like a medial lateral posterior support, sort of. So it mostly flexes and extends, right? We can bend and straighten the knee. There is a tiny bit of rotation in the tibia, so you can internally and externally rotate the knee joint. It's easier when it's bent. So it does have a little bit of play in that plane. It has very, very, very minimal medial lateral play. And so that's mainly because of like bony blocks. And so then structures that keep your knee stable are a lot of major ligaments, which people, if you've been around skiing, soccer, any like load-bearing sports, you've probably heard of them because they're commonly injured. So MCL, your medial collateral ligament, your lateral collateral ligament, those are the ones on the inside and the outside. The medial one is a flatter, wider one, while the lateral one is a thicker, more like band. It's like a tube almost. That one's really hard to tear. Medial one's easier to tear. And then you have your ACL and PCL, and their job is to control the like forward and backward movement of like the tibia on the femur. So if you took your right hand and crossed your fingers like this, so everyone take your right hand, cross your middle finger over your index, and then if you hold that over your knee, kind of like I am right here, that sort of mimics the diagonal layering of your ACL and your PCL. So the ACL is on top, and that one is what holds your tibia from coming forward, and then your PCL is the one that holds it from coming back. So the PCL injury is commonly nicknamed like the dashboard injury. So if you were in a car accident and your knee was bent and your lower leg hit your dashboard and your femur kept going, you're probably going to tear your PCL because it's trying to hold that, but it can't. Then the ACL, of course, is like, everyone hears about the ACL if they ski, and it's just the main ligament that, it's like if you sit back, if you're like leaning way back and your tibia is locked into your ski boot, that ligament at some point is going to give out. So if you sort of understand the mechanics behind the knee, you'll kind of understand, how it's being loaded in skiing, how, some of it you can't really avoid. Trauma is trauma. But definitely with some like strengthening and conditioning, you can help have more stability and mobility from the joints above it, like your hip and your quad. If everything's strong, right? The stronger you are, the more your joints are going to be supported. So you're going to give yourself, your joints are going to have to take more before they're going to like be injured and tear. So that's sort of the knee in a nutshell. And then now you think about skiing. So we'll talk about alpine skiing. So you're essentially locking your ankle into a ski boot that's rigid, right? And then you're putting that rigid boot onto a long piece of essentially wood, metal, and base, right? So like when you think about it like that, it sounds kind of silly. Like, what are we doing to ourselves? But if anything is, so now you've lost you've lost any kind of like ankle play. So the next joint up the line is your knee, and then you've got your hip, and then your spine. And so any kind of like torque coming off the boot is like kind of automatically going to go load the knee, right? And the knee does okay, bending and straightening, but it doesn't do that well laterally. So that's why we have these ligaments and everything to like try and hold everything in place. And so they've found that like if your knee comes in, right, like back in the day before cut skis, we talked a lot about A-framing. I don't know if anyone's here that can remember those days. But that's where like, if you're standing and your knee moves in like towards midline in relation to your foot and your hip, that position is just making like the joint a little more vulnerable, especially the ACL. And then you add in all the forces of skiing, which are a lot. Just the act of turning can load up the knee. And then just the ski kind of like all over the place, right? That's when we fall. And if your ski doesn't fall off, the knee takes the brunt of it. Because that's the next joint up the line. And usually when you're falling, there's definitely going to be some like rotational force coming up the ski. I don't know, this sounds kind of depressing when you think about it. Unless you're tomahawking like perfectly, you're going to have some weird load if your ski doesn't fall off. So that being said, if you just kind of think about it, like that's why I think the knee gets injured, or like if you have a lot of tib-fib fractures above the boot, because something's going to give, right? And so one thing that isn't as much of an issue now, it was kind of an issue, was like, people were tearing when, this is more ski racing. I feel like most of my data is from ski racing, but once when they were playing around with side cuts, so right when I was making the US ski team, like 1998, 1999, I know I'm pretty old, is when all, like the parabolic thing like exploded. And it was in the couple of years after that, they started to try to really regulate. They were trying to figure out the side cut, and skis suddenly had a lot of radius, and so when you made them stiff and gave them to professional skiers, like people were tearing their ACLs just from like getting too much energy out of the ski coming out of the turn, because the ski would fly forward, and right, we talked about how the tibia is being held in place by the ACL so that it doesn't go forward too fast. If you get a super fast forward load, it's gonna stress it. So, which was crazy, right? You assume you have to like crash to tear your ACL, but there was like one season where people were tearing their ACLs just from the power energy coming out of these like stiff skis with these really strong athletes. But that's not that common. That's just like a crazy fact that I won't forget, because that kind of blew my mind. So there's that. And then another position in skiing that, there was another study, and I don't know if I've talked about this on here, but there was a longitudinal study in Europe a few years ago, and it had all teenage ski racers, and if anyone tore their ACL, they tried to figure out what was the common denominator of weakness in their conditioning, and men, girls, and boys was core, but more specifically the posterior core. So they found that if your low back's weak and can't control like the like hinge of your hips, so the collapse of your upper body forward, like if you stand up and you just do that, you'll notice that like your knees come in. So they found that if you were weaker in that movement and in that area, your body would automatically compensate and have the knee come in, and then you're putting the knee in a more vulnerable position. So they found this like correlation that was like the most significant area of weakness that they found that correlated to ACL injuries. Now this is ski racers, so slightly different than your typical recreational skier, but something to think about. So whenever I create any of my ski conditioning programs, after learning that, and we did a lot of that when I was ski racing, and it makes more sense to me now why. So I put a lot of that type of hinging strength into a lot of my strength programs. So it's tricky, right? Like you can strengthen and strengthen and strengthen, and then you just crash, like it happens, right? You can be really strong. You think about all these, professional skiers, like those are the people we hear and see, and most of them are really strong. Like they train and they still get hurt. So part of it is like part of skiing, right? There's like a little bit of risk in it in itself if you just think about what we're doing. Like I was saying, right? You're locking your ankles into a rigid boot and attaching them to long pieces of wood. Like you're going to have weird torque up the body into different joints. So there's that. But I think that being strong in all the, all those muscles that cross the knee joint are important, right? Like the quad is what's going to take the brunt of skiing. If you haven't conditioned for skiing, because your knee is flexed in your ski boot, that means your ankle's flexed in your ski boot, that means your knee is flexed. Therefore, your quad is like always on. And that's why our quads have such a hard time when the ski season starts, because they're always working, and they're working in this like sort of like up and down motion that we're not used to in our daily life. So our quads get really tired really quickly skiing. And you'll, if you've been a skier, you know that. You feel this, right? First day, maybe first weekend, your quads get super tired. And it's because they're not used to that type of movement and load for that, like over and over and over. It's just sort of like new use, and so they fatigue. Hamstrings also technically need to be strong as well, so you don't have an imbalance. Your hamstrings and your quads are sort of like opposite each other. Your quad, in theory, when it's working concentrically, so shortening, it straightens your knee, hamstrings flex the knee, right? So they're kind of agonist and antagonist. Protagonist? So, and then your calf, right? Like your gastroc isn't really working that hard when you're skiing and with a ski boot, but your soleus is. That muscle is the one that doesn't cross the knee joint, but is the one that stabilizes your tibia when your knee's bent, which is, like I said, when your ankle's slightly bent in your ski boot, your knee's bent, so then your quad is always on. So I think ways to try to prevent or like make your body more resilient to knee injury is, first just like looking at the quad, right? Like, or I guess first we should talk about like fatigue. So because skiing is such a unique load to our bodies, it's hard to mimic it on outside of skiing. So you see lots of people doing like, tucks and up and down and jumping, and what you're trying to do is, right, you're trying to create this like quick bend, absorption, push off, knee bend, knee straighten, and it's got to be really fast because skiing is really fast. Like if you're making short turns or, moving quickly, your legs are moving pretty fast. And so that takes a lot of work. And if you haven't prepped your body to go skiing and then you go skiing, everything's going to get really fatigued really fast. And so even if you're, strong and doing something else, but it's something that doesn't have a lot of high repetition and it's not that powerful, your muscles should, even though you might have strong quads, but they're not used to working in the way they work for skiing, they're going to get fatigued. And then when our muscles fatigue, and doing anything, they're not as like, they get tired, right? So they're not engaging as well. And our muscles are one of the components that stabilize our joints. So, you can hurt yourself any run of the day, but I feel like maybe it's just that like old wives' tale, but it's classic that when people are tired towards the end of the day, if you do get hurt, it is of course your last run, but like, when everyone's like, oh, I'll go for one more, and then they hurt themselves. It's part of it is fatigue. You've lost the muscular joint stability, and now the next layer of stability for that joint is going to be a ligament, maybe a tendon, maybe something in your joint. So you're either going to strain a ligament or sprain the joint, something you've unpeeled the muscular stability layer, and now you're onto this like more different layer of stability, and that's something that will give, that doesn't have any stretch. So part of it is fatigue, and the quads especially, because the quads are just beat all day when we ski, so they get tired. And then that can be said for any of the muscles for skiing. I think doing a lot of like single leg strength exercises, a lot of balance exercises that are, slow and controlled, but also quick and dynamic are really important, because since it's not like snowboarding where our feet are kind of like are stuck in place, you don't have one leg going this way, one leg going that way, they're not going to have as many knee injuries as skiing because our legs are, moving independently. So I find if you're strong, if you're able to control your leg independently from your body, then you're going to be able to steer that ski, and then that knee is hopefully being supported from somewhere else, up the chain into the hip, the back. So I talked about that low back strength is so important. And so I don't think there's any secret trick to helping knees be more stable. You just need everything to be really balanced. So you need your quad to be strong and have good endurance and be dynamic. You need your hamstring. You need you need to have your body be able to really control your legs. And so that means your hips and all the muscles that attach to your hip and your back and your core need to be really strong so that you can have good control over your legs. Good hip mobility. I have this theory I have to knock on wood before I say this. So I ski raced pretty much my whole life, or year round, I should say, until I was 26. Knock on wood, I did not injure my knee in any way. No, that's a lie. I don't think I tore it. I sprained my MCL at Last Chance Slalom in Utah. It snowed it was like a costume race in the spring. I was dressed in an old prom dress and I fell. And I sprained my MCL. It was not a race I was supposed to be doing, probably. So I did injure my knee. But, knock on wood, I did not have any knee surgery. My theory that I thought of when I was in PT school is that I have an incredible amount of internal hip rotation. So, not incredible, but I have a lot of internal hip rotation. So, I didn't do this much as a kid, but you maybe heard of people talking about W sitting. I can sit on the ground and have I can't do it anymore, but well into my 20s, I could sit and have my lower legs out to the side. And I have horrible external rotation. As a kid and even now sitting butterfly, my knees are in my ears. So part of my theory, and I need to somehow do some a study, is that because I have a lot of internal rotation in my hip, I think my hips take a lot of the brunt of the torque instead of my knee. That's my theory. So if anyone's out there that has ski raced a lot or skied a lot and has not injured their knees or have, I'm curious about your hip mobility. So if you want to be part of the study, let me know. But so hip mobility, because if there's going to be torque put on the femur, if the hip gives a little bit, the knee might give a little bit. And that's all me just speculating. I haven't read a study on any of that. So I guess there's no quick fix, right? There's trauma. There's things we can't avoid because we're attaching our, I've said this a few times, we're putting our foot into a rigid boot and then attaching it to a long ski, and the knee is the first joint to take it. So that's why they get so beat up. But being strong so that we don't we can have better control about not getting into vulnerable positions. That's that low back hinging strength. Having good muscle endurance, having good single leg stability, strength, training that quick dynamic load through the legs so it can work in that quick motion, then it's not going to get as tired as fast. And listening to your body, if you're just gassed and you're maybe the conditions are soft or I don't know, listen to your body, especially as we get older. We're not as stiff. We're not as resilient. We don't bend quite as much. And so I've started to think about that a little bit more. I'm almost 40 and it's crazy to say out loud, but, I just lost my train of thought because I was reading Kate's thing. But now, when I'm really tired, I, don't take that run. If it's, hiking something. I'm getting better at, saying no because I'm not as bendy and bouncy anymore. So Kate's saying... So that's interesting. So she's my first part of my research study. Aaron Rice, who skied a lot, she's saying he hasn't had any knee injuries and he has flexible hips. Internal or external, or if it goes both ways, I guess it doesn't matter. So maybe that my theory is solid. 2 people. Just kidding. But yeah, so I think those are the pieces to think about, and you do your best to stay ahead of it, but skiing, anything we do, we walk out the door, right? There's some sort of risk, and just the skiing in general is kind of hard on the body, and it's putting a lot of weird forces into our body. I think my knees are a little loose. but, you know, they work, so he's got good external. But either way, like, if the hip moves well, then maybe the knee doesn't have to get as much torque. So, again, anyone who's skied a lot, who has had knee issues and not, like, ligamentous knee issues and not, I want to know about your hip range of motion. So feel free to DM me any of that information, and I'll start to make a database. All right, so that is, I think, everything I wanted to talk about. But if this has piqued anybody's interest, I guess I should say, and most people who listen to this have known about it, but Powder Hour, the online conditioning class that I teach, I talk about a lot of this, and I try to create a lot of exercises that do everything I was just talking about. And you can still sign up for that, and it's going to be open all winter. So even though it's almost January and you feel like you're behind, you're not at all. I think doing a little bit and learning at any point is important. So you can look that up on my website. And yeah, so next week will be 2022, which is super exciting. And Friday night up here, it's going to be the first Friday Night Lights, so I'll be there helping. Should be really fun. Black Open today, which is exciting. And yeah, we'll get to ring in the new year doing Friday Night Lights, which is always fun. And get to see our whole ski family. And yeah, I think that's it. So yeah, it's, you know, winters are always weird up here, but it's good right now. I heard someone said they skied all the way down the Sherby today and didn't hit that many rocks. So that might be better. We went up there last Tuesday, and I walked most of the Sherby because I just have a hard time hitting rocks. I think it's from growing up as a ski racer, whereas the boys made it like 3/4 of the way down, but I think they hit a lot of rocks. Andrew said that he put some good, what was he saying? He put some structure into his skis, which, you know, I don't know if everyone wants that, but it was okay. Not, you know, it's not in, is how I would say it. So anyway, yeah, everyone have a great night, and I will see you next year.